Welcome to Measuring Success Right, the official podcast of the Marriott Student Review, a podcast for students by students, where we connect the leaders of tomorrow with the issues of today.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Measuring Success Right. My name is Michael Insero. I'm here with Dr. Davey Erekson. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. Davey, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us about what you do. Tell us about your family, your hobbies, whatever. Help us get to know you.
I'm Davey Erekson, and I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I'm a licensed psychologist, and my job right now is at BYU in counseling and psychological services. So I'm a clinical professor, which means I get to teach some classes and do some research and then do therapy with the students, which is a lot of fun. It's kind of a dream job, I think, for many psychologists because you don't often get to do all of those things in one job. The most distinctive part of my little family right now is probably that we have two sets of twins. So I have two 7-year-olds and two 10-year-olds, one boy, 3 girls. They're all fraternal. We did in vitro, so I have pictures of them at 8 cells. Those are my favorite baby pictures.
Wow.
8-cell pictures. Hobbies. Let's see. Oh, I'm married too. So that's good. I'm married to Erica and I love her. And we have a beautiful love story that I could spend the hour on and have spent some classes on because students know that they can get me talking about that.
So, Davey, you mentioned that you have a PhD in clinical psychology. I'm sure there's a whole lot of classes along the way that have instructed you and changed how you saw the world. So would you tell us a little bit about some of the big lessons that you've gotten from that and also in your work today as a therapist and administrator and researcher?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to expand your question just a little because if I'm thinking about like things that stick with me and feel like they permanently change the way that I think about something or the way that I experience something. So one experience, and this is why I'm expanding it. It was a class, but it was a kindergarten class. So I have this really distinct memory of being in this class and we were all learning the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where they'd have the words written out on this big pad of paper and the teacher was kind of instructing us on like which words where and what the melody was. And there was this kid in our class who was universally accepted as a bully, and I tried to avoid him because I didn't want to get hurt, but someone that wasn't well liked and also tended to push people around a bit. And we were sitting there singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And I remember the phrase where it goes, somewhere over the rainbow, and watching this kid sing it and thinking, this person is so much more than my like fear of him or than the class's experience of him as not a nice person. Like this is a human being that has some real feelings and experiences. And I know that sounds like this is my old language placed into my 7-year-old brain. I'm sure I didn't articulate it that way at the time, but that's how I remember feeling. And frankly, when I think about 7, I feel like I felt pretty adult. Like I remember hearing adults say things and be like, well, I don't know about that. And thinking like I sort of understood the world. And I understand that now that that's not true. But I really did feel like this connection of like humanity and care and like this person mattered. And this was a person that was kind of a threat in my life. And so that felt like a shift to me, like this shift towards openness about people when I was really pretty young. And that, I don't know why that stuck with me, but it was potent for me.
That is a wonderful experience. I've had similar experiences, of course, probably not at 7, but those are always really important touchstones, I guess, for me when I think about people and when I'm dealing with a challenge. just remembering that who they are and what they experience is so much more than anything I will ever see.
Yeah. Which reminds me of another touchstone for me, which this is older. I was 17, and my parents kind of knew some of my interests. Like, I would write poetry and plays, and I liked film, and they thought, we're going to take Davey to the Sundance Film Festival. And so the two of them took me to see a film. And I think about it now, and there were 5 kids in our family. Like, where was everyone else? I don't know, but it was really like, it's moving to me now to remember being alone with them going to the Sundance Film Festival. And this wasn't because they were like film junkies and wanted to go see it. Sure. This was because they knew that this would be interesting to me. So we got these tickets to a movie that's a documentary on 2 guys who are trying to make a horror movie. But these are guys who listened to like heavy metal, which was very different from what I listened to. They had longer hair. They lived in a different place. They definitely used different language than I did. And I remember sitting in that movie and feeling the same kind of sense of like, wow, this privilege of being pulled into this person's experience. And I just felt like this sense of care across sort of like differences that might, in a normal sort of social situation, I might have not felt like I could have approached them. But here I was entering their world, and it just felt beautiful. Like this, I felt this really deep sense of care. And these kinds of feelings I've kind of connected along the way to feeling like I'm connecting to our siblinghood, connecting to the love of God, connecting to like what's real between us. And then on my mission, I felt these similar things where, you know, you're instructed to teach. And I found that I really liked listening more. And I liked listening first. And I really felt almost like, how can I say anything if I don't know what this person is thinking and feeling? And so that's where I really, on my mission, felt connected to, was when I was like, I really want to know this person and hear them and feel with them. So I think those were the early indications for me, at least, that like maybe psychology would be a good like route in terms of like clinical practice, because maybe that's what you're doing. And it turns out now that I do it, it is what I do.
So, Davey, my wife is currently in your compassion-focused living class, and she's really loving it. And I wanted to ask you to help to paint a picture of what it looks like to successfully exercise compassion.
I think we all engage with compassion. Compassion is a word that's used colloquially and religiously. And so we all have these sort of preconceived notions of what it is. And sometimes those preconceived notions can be something like, well, compassion is about serving others, right? Like if I'm serving others, then I'm being compassionate. Or compassion is about forgetting myself. If it's about me, you know, people say more and more often now, I think in our society, well, you should be like self-compassionate. I agree with this, by the way. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be. And sometimes that self-compassion feels like, well, give yourself a break, or, you know, buy something you want, eat something you like. And I think that can be compassionate to yourself. And sometimes maybe it isn't. And so I think compassion is a big concept that's used a lot sort of informally. But if you think of it as, so the course that I teach and some of the therapy that I do is based in compassion-focused therapy. And if you think of compassion in terms that compassion-focused therapy does, where compassion is actually the innate answer to suffering that each of us has, then I think it becomes more substantive and more complex. Everyone has an innate compassionate response. Now, when I say extremes, I always question myself in my mind, like, oh, but is there one person who doesn't have that? And the answer is probably yes. So most people have an innate compassionate response and will often early on in the class or sometimes in group therapy have people think about someone that they care about that's suffering. And then rather than focus on their suffering, like the suffering of that person, just think about them and focus on what does that draw out of you. So what sorts of feelings arise? What sorts of motivations? What sorts of thoughts? And that usually gets you exploring this sense of like, oh, I have this innate compassionate response. And it usually boils down to something like, I care about this pain and I'm willing to feel it with this person. And I feel motivated to alleviate it in some way. And those are the two parts that we work with compassion is like, can we approach human pain rather than shy away from it? And can we then work with this motivation to alleviate it? And along with that comes a sense of sort of being dedicated to not intentionally harming. And that part seems sort of like, well, that's a given. Of course, I don't want to intentionally harm. But then think about when you're angry with someone, sometimes you maybe do want to intentionally harm, say something that's going to really sting or cut someone off in traffic so that they feel that frustration, right? Like we want to intentionally harm, but if you can be committed to a compassionate response to yourself and others, the idea is, and I think the first part is particularly difficult with oneself and with extreme pain in others, but like, can I approach and feel the pain without running away from it? Can I tolerate the discomfort of real pain long enough to truly care and understand it? And then can I work towards alleviating it? And we have some wisdom about, okay, what might that mean in this context? And so like I was saying earlier, like in certain contexts, maybe eating something you like or like giving yourself a break on doing homework at night, like maybe that's compassionate. Sometimes that is what you need. And then other times you can sort of like get into what you're feeling and understand, well, the stress is about things stacking up maybe. And I feel like there's too much to do. And so maybe the compassionate thing to do is to work on my homework, even though it's hard right now. And that will be what alleviates the pain moving forward. So that's what I mean about compassion is complex and substantive. Like it's more than just being nice to yourself or to others, and it's contextual. So it's not always clear, oh, well, this would be the compassionate thing to do in every circumstance. Each circumstance calls for a different kind of compassion. And probably each person has their own unique offering for what compassion would look like. So for me, given, I told you these stories about my history, part of what I can give is like, oh, I want to sit and be with you and understand you and care. And as a therapist, I think I offer that. And for other people, that might not be the kind of compassion they can offer, but a person who fights fires and pulls someone out of a building could be acting compassionately. The action of going in, caring, taking them out to help that person avoid pain, that's a very active sort of compassionate, active compassionate action. I'd probably revise that if I wrote it.
That's all right. No, I think that's really good. I wish we were publishing this before finals so that everyone could hear that part about what self-compassion really means about homework. I'm definitely guilty of applying that principle wrong. But I think that's helpful, especially in the context of treating others and recognizing. I think the other side of that coin is recognizing that, yes, we do have something unique to offer as like from our compassion, which is different than that which others offer.
Right.
And not saying your offering is less than others' offerings because they're different.
Because it's different. Yeah, I love that. That's really great. Because it seems, I mean, maybe it's because I'm often working with folks who are in distress and need to come in for therapy. But it seems like it's really easy for people to diminish their contribution to the world around them. Around here, like people are trying to be humble, which is great. You know, I want people to feel like they can tap into a healthy humility. But sometimes that means that they want to diminish their unique and important contributions. And so what you just said, I really like, where it's like, you know, even if you're not doing it like someone else, no one really can do it just like you, and your contribution to people around you, to yourself, to the world is important.
Thank you, Davey. So I'm going to read off the vision, mission, and values of the Marriott School of Business. And I've asked Davey to respond to one or a few of them that resonate with him. Here they are. So the vision is, we aspire to transform the world through Christ-like leadership. Our mission is that we develop leaders of faith, intellect, and character. Our values include faith in Christ, integrity in action, respect for all, and excellence. Davey, which of these speaks to you?
So faith in Christ for me does envelop maybe all values, where as we're engaging with our faith, we find ourselves having integrity and having respect and engaging in excellence. I know that a lot of people are in a lot of different places in terms of what their faith looks like. And all of those things feel like kind of okay and important to me too, as we engage with each other in ways that are keeping the two great commandments. And I don't think they're really like separable. I think that as you engage with people in ways that know them better, and in ways where you're really developing a sense of care, of charity, of Christ-like love, then you're engaging in your faith too. So, you know, like sometimes people feel like, well, if I'm in the middle of a faith crisis, like, then does this not like apply to me, or are they speaking to someone else? And I'm not trying to like say, well, no, you have to, like anything you're doing is engaging with the faith that I'm saying it is. But I think like from my perspective, I feel like I'm always engaging in it. And the more that we can know each other and care about each other across differences, like we've talked about, like I think the better we're engaging with it. And I think Christ modeled that in the interactions that we have recorded. And then I think it's also probably modeled in the personal revelation that people receive all across campus every day. So that one's cool. Integrity in action. So this sort of fits in with excellence, maybe. So integrity in action is great, and excellence is great. And both, I think, could easily be tied to a perfectionism, where you start to feel so scared that you're going to do something wrong that you shut down, where your integrity to a principle becomes like such a sort of like an external criterion, where you say, this person said this, and therefore I have to do this. And that begins to make life really tricky again, as we were noticing how contextual compassion can be, right? All things have a context, and it can be really tricky if you're trying to rigidly apply something that you haven't internalized in a way that allows you to figure out, okay, well, how do I be true to this thing that I really feel in this context? So the parable of the talents, I want to talk about briefly.
Please.
Because the parable of the talents, I think because the word is talent, people are always saying, yeah, that means share your talents. Don't bury your talents. Go up there and sing in church. Don't bury your talents. I don't know. Tap dance if you know how.
I find that to be true, yes. People equate those.
Yeah, but I'm like, talents, I think, was just the currency.
It was.
And so one way that I've liked to think about it is in kind of this idea of like integrity or excellence. There's one way to have integrity where it's like, I'm so afraid of the master that I'm going to bury this thing. I think the person in the parable says something like, I know that he's a hard man. And so he goes and buries it because he's so afraid that if anything happens to this, I'm going to get punished. And so think about that mindset in terms of like approaching, say, the commandments or the way that you interact with the world. You can be so afraid that you sort of rigidly hold on to things in ways that don't let you develop or expand or contribute to other people. So you're focused more maybe on, I've got to keep this commandment than you are on like, oh, there's a person in front of me. And so then the others who go and they like do things with their talents and then they get twofold or fivefold or tenfold or I'm sure people could fact check this and they'd notice those aren't the correct folds.
They serve for us.
But I like the idea of being able to have integrity in a way where I go and I multiply my talents. So instead of feeling afraid of, well, what if I don't do it right? Taking the risk of connecting with other people, taking the risk of really feeling, I'll take it back to compassion, really like compassionately engaging and then watching how you keep those commandments, right? And it becomes about like blessings in your life and blessings in other people's lives and less about, look, I kept this thing untouched by others, buried in the earth, and please don't punish me. So I think that kind of integrity where it's like I can go out and magnify myself, not in sort of a pompous way, but where I'm willing to share who I am with others in this caring, compassionate way. That's cool integrity. And I think it includes things like people often think, well, I got to be honest. Well, think about being honest relationally. Like, I want to be honest because that's going to help me and that's going to help them. And it'll be so much easier if we all just are on the same page and know what, like, I'm trying not to harm people, right? There's that kind of integrity, I think, is easier and feels better and is more expansive than like, I have to be 100% honest. So I need to sort of scrupulously check each thing that I've said for whether or not it's true. Tricky, but important. So excellence too, I think you can kind of fall into like, am I achieving enough? Am I performing well enough? And I'm always striving for excellence. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I could stop striving for so much excellence because it is tiring. And it doesn't mean that I'm achieving excellence, as I'm saying. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could stop being so excellent. But that's not what I mean.
No, we all feel that too. I mean, at least as BYU students.
I achieve plenty of like good old average work. And it's been work for me to sort of accept that that's maybe enough. And so when a striving for excellence turns into something that leads to self-criticism or that leads to feeling overwhelmed, then I think you get into a little bit of trouble and you can't produce as much and you can't produce the excellent things that are inside of you. And so many like artists talk about how you have to produce so much in order to get your one excellent thing. And so you kind of have to be willing to engage with things that don't feel quite as excellent to get to the excellence.
I think that's absolutely true. One thing that's helped me cope with that you're just talking about with excellence is believing that any work towards a worthy goal that I do is good. Whether that's 1 minute of work or 5 minutes of work or 100 hours of work, that was either 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 100 hours of good. And it helps me not get so caught up in well, exactly how good, you know, and suddenly if I fall below a standard, right, we have the infamous grading scale, right? If my 100 hours of good didn't exactly line up with A, therefore that 100 hours of good is bad. It's just not true. And it keeps things in perspective because there are standards and marks that sometimes we do need to meet, right? Like feeding myself. I do need to eat a certain amount to successfully live. But I digress. Thank you for that response, Dave. I really appreciate it. Before we close, I want to ask you one last question.
Wait, can I respond to your one thing, though?
Oh, of course.
Because I just want to say, I think that you're kind of illustrating like how you can either respond to yourself critically or you can respond to yourself with this, like with a kindness or compassion. And this also, people are like, well, if I'm not critical, how do I get to excellence? But I feel like they're independent from each other. Like you can respond in many ways to failure or in many ways to stress. One way can be critical. Another way could be kind or compassionate. So like with your 100 minutes, right? It's like, well, 100 minutes, like, I can't believe you just did 100 minutes. And think about all of the emotion and the feeling behind that. Like, how do you feel about yourself when you're saying that? And really there's some disdain, some frustration. Like, I don't really like, if that were someone saying it to you outside of you, it's like, wow, that person doesn't like me much, or they're really frustrated. Or you can say, all right, like let's say you wanted to do more than 100 minutes. It's like, okay, I did 100 minutes. That's good. That's something. And now I want to do more. Very different than excoriating yourself.
Right.
And it feels so natural to excoriate ourselves. But one exercise that I think is helpful is pull it out and imagine someone's leaning over your shoulder saying that. Or imagine that you're saying that to someone that you care about. Is that something you want to engage in or something you want to be absorbing? And probably not. In the end, you can notice what you want to do better without being self-critical. So anyway, I liked that you illustrated that. Okay, final question.
Thank you. Yeah, final question. Davey, how do you measure success? This is a broad question, and you can answer it how you like.
My first impulse is to say I don't. But then I do, like when I do therapy, I'm trying to we measure symptoms over time. And if they're improving, then we're like, okay, there's some success. But also when we measure it over time and it doesn't look like they're improving, I think I find other ways to feel like there's success there. So maybe I always measure success too. I'm like, I never do, but I always do. Right. I sometimes find myself feeling like, well, I count my publications. That's how I measure success. Is that I count my publications, and then that'll, help me become. I'm up for full professor this next year, and so that'll help me in my file to get full professor. And then I'm like, well, Davey, is that really success? And frankly, sometimes that feels a little hollow. I'm like, well, I don't know. That's what I care about most. I mean, I don't want to keep beating this drum, but I'm going to beat it a little more. That one thing that I do notice feels like success to me is when I can be with someone in a way that feels meaningful. Whether that's professionally or in therapy or in the classroom or in research collaborations or in my family, I do notice that feels like success to me. And when I see others doing it, I feel moved by it. And so it's maybe this establishment of Zion where each of us appreciates what we can bring to the community and we care about each other and lift each other up. That also feels like success to me.
Thank you so much, Davey, for telling us your story and sharing with us what you've learned. I hope our listeners all enjoyed. I sure did. We'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you never miss an episode. Be a friend and tell a friend about measuring success right.
This podcast is a project of the Marriott Student Review at Brigham Young University. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Marriott Student Review or online at marriottstudentreview.org.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect official policy or position of Brigham Young University or The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.